At the military training range, the morning noise was the same as always. Rifles cracking, brass bouncing off concrete, sergeants shouting commands, but something unusual was unfolding at the far end of lane 12. A quiet, wiry old janitor stood sweeping up spent casings, head slightly bowed, shoulders hunched beneath a faded maroon workshirt. The younger soldiers didn't bother hiding their smirks as they looked at him. They dismissed him the moment they laid eyes on him. Just an old man with a broom, probably someone's grandfather earning a few extra dollars. But what they didn't know was that the day would end with their jaws on the floor. They would laugh at him, mock him, dismiss him, and then witness something that would spread across the entire base by sunset. They were about to learn that the man they looked down on had once done things they couldn't even imagine. Keep listening. And which city are you listening from? And if you enjoy the story, please do subscribe for more. The old man continued sweeping as three young airmen gathered behind him, their rifles slung casually over their shoulders. Their confidence was loud, their arrogance louder, the kind you only get from being good enough to think you're great. "Dude, look at him," one said under his breath, nudging the others. "Why is he even in here? He's gonna slip on a casing and break a hip." Another laughed. "Bet he's never even touched a real rifle in his life. Probably thinks this place is loud because of construction." The third one shook his head, smirking. "Leave him, man. Old-timers like him are harmless. They just shuffle around and complain about the good old days." The old janitor raised his eyes for a moment, meeting theirs, not with anger, not with shame, but with an unreadable calm. Then he simply kept sweeping. That only made them laugh harder. The stakes rose quickly. The range sergeant, frustrated after watching them repeatedly miss their target grouping, barked at the three airmen. "If you jokers don't tighten up your spread, you'll be repeating this entire qualification cycle. Eyes ahead, focus!" But the men weren't thinking about their performance. Their attention kept drifting back to the old janitor moving slowly across the lane. One of the airmen whispered, "Hey, maybe we can get him to show us how to hit the target. He probably fought in the War of 1812. More laughter. Louder this time, and then the rehook arrived, quiet, subtle, but enough to shift the air. As the old man bent down to pick up a handful of casings, one of the airmen intentionally fired a shot dangerously close to his sweeping path, the bullet smacking the paper target but meant to intimidate. The old man didn't flinch, not an inch, not a blink. The soldiers stopped laughing just for a heartbeat, confused by the lack of reaction. Anyone else would have jumped, anyone else would have cursed. But he simply stood upright, brushed dust from his palms, and looked downrange at the target the young soldier had just fired at. Then he spoke for the first time that morning with a voice soft, cracked, and impossibly steady. "You're pulling your shots," he said, "breathing too fast, shoulders too tight. You're trying to control the rifle instead of letting it settle." The soldiers froze. The sergeant turned sharply toward the old man, and in that moment the tone shifted from mockery to curiosity, to something else they couldn't yet name. This old janitor, this quiet man with a broom, wasn't supposed to know that. He wasn't supposed to know anything about shooting. But he did, and soon they were about to learn exactly how much. The range fell quiet for a moment after the old janitor spoke, quiet in that sharp, uncomfortable way where everyone's ears strain, not because they didn't hear him, but because they couldn't believe he had actually said something. The airmen blinked, glanced at each other, then burst out laughing again even louder than before. "Oh, look at that!" One jeered. "The janitor's giving shooting lessons." Another shook his head mockingly. "Yeah, what's next, old man? Gonna teach us how to clear a malfunction?" The third one smirked. "Or maybe he's got some combat secrets from when dinosaurs roamed the earth." But something had changed. Their voices had a thin edge under the laughter, a slight tremor of insecurity, the kind that comes from knowing the person you're insulting might not be what he appears. Still, they doubled down, unwilling to cede ground to a stranger with a mop. The sergeant snapped at them to cut it out, but even he was staring curiously at the old man now. "Hey," one airman said challengingly, "why don't you try hitting a target if you know so much?" He tossed a spare rifle toward the janitor. It clattered onto the concrete at his feet. A few officers at the far end of the range looked over, sensing something unusual unfolding. The stakes sharpened instantly. Everyone expected the old man to decline, maybe mutter an apology, maybe shuffle away, maybe feel embarrassed enough to leave the range entirely. But instead, the old janitor slowly bent down and picked up the rifle with the tenderness of a man handling a sleeping child. He checked the chamber. He checked the safety. Checked the iron sights. Every movement was clean, efficient, instinctive. The kind of movement you do not learn unless you have done it tens of thousands of times. The soldiers noticed. Their smirks wavered. "Well," one taunted, voice now uncertain, "you gonna shoot or what?" The old man didn't answer. He simply lifted the rifle, inhaled lightly through his nose, and exhaled once, long, slow, controlled. That one breath alone made the sergeant narrow his eyes. That was a marksman's breath, a competitor's breath. A sniper's breath. Then came the next twist, an emotional shift that hooked every eye on the range. The old man didn't raise the rifle to his shoulder. Instead, he placed it carefully on the table in front of him. Then calmly and without breaking eye contact with the airman, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, faded strip of black fabric. He tied it tightly around his head, covering his eyes completely. The range erupted in whispers. "What's he doing? Is he blindfolding himself? No way, he's serious." The airmen laughed again, but their voices were thin now, frail with doubt. "Oh, now he's showing off," one said, laughing too hard. "What next? He gonna shoot behind his back?" The sergeant didn't laugh. He felt something tightening in his chest, recognition dancing on the edge of memory. He had seen someone shoot blindfolded once, long ago, during a demonstration by a visiting special operations unit. Only a handful of people in the world could do it accurately. Only those who spent their lives behind scopes and triggers. The old man picked up the rifle again. Blindfolded, silent, he stood at the firing line, and the range, full of young men who thought they knew everything, fell silent. No one laughed now, no one smirked, no one breathed. And as he slowly leveled the rifle, the entire atmosphere shifted from mockery to anticipation to the dawning realization that they were not witnessing an act of desperation. They were witnessing an act of mastery. What happened next would echo across the base for months. The range settled into an eerie stillness as the old man's blindfolded silhouette steadied at the firing line, the rifle lightly cradled in his hands as though it weighed nothing. Airmen who had laughed moments earlier now stood frozen, their eyes darting between each other as if silently asking whether anyone else understood what they were witnessing. The sergeant's breath hitched, memories flickered in his mind, stories he had heard whispered in deployed tents about legendary shooters who could hit targets without needing sight. But before he could speak, the old man shifted his stance, feet angled, posture perfect, the kind only a lifetime of training could etch into the body. He raised the rifle with slow precision, not fumbling, not guessing, just moving with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where every line, shadow, and distance existed even without seeing them. He inhaled deeply, the sound soft but steady, and then, crack, the round exploded downrange. Instantly the soldiers flinched, their eyes snapping to the furthest steel plate. A half-second later, ping, the metal plate sang like a church bell struck by lightning. "No way," one airman whispered, voice cracking. The sergeant's eyes widened. This wasn't lucky. The cadence of the old man's breathing, the angle of his shoulders, the effortless recoil control, they were watching a master. Before their shock could settle, crack, ping, another hit, crack, ping, crack, ping. Each shot was identical in tempo and accuracy, as though he were striking notes on an instrument only he could hear. Officers at the far lane paused their own drills, hearing the rhythmic impacts. A pair of Marines near the entrance lowered their weapons, drifting closer to watch. Soldiers from other sections stepped out of their bays, drawn by the unnatural precision. Within 30 seconds, half the shooting range was gathered behind the old man, silent, mesmerized, the blindfolded figure before them firing with a calm certainty that broke every rule of probability. Then, after the 8th flawless hit, he lowered the rifle. A long breath escaped him, a controlled release, the kind used to settle the body after precision action. But the old man wasn't done. He reached forward and gently placed the rifle on the table, the room still dead quiet. Then his hands moved again, unfastening the magazine, locking the bolt, clearing the chamber, every action smooth, fluid, automatic. He disassembled the weapon in seconds. Blindfolded. Someone gasped. Someone else muttered a curse under their breath. One airman's face turned pale, the earlier arrogance evaporating into something that looked almost like fear. In their world, only elite special forces, top-tier operators, could field-strip rifles blindfolded with that kind of speed and grace. The sergeant took a half-step forward, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Sir, who are you?" But the old man didn't answer. He simply reassembled the rifle with the same effortless mastery, snapping the final pin into place with a soft click that echoed like a closing chapter. He removed the blindfold and set it neatly beside the weapon. The younger airmen stared wide-eyed, their bravado shattered. And then, as confusion turned to unease, something else happened, something that clenched every throat on that firing line. The base alarm system chimed, the gate cameras whirred, and a voice crackled across the intercom. "Attention! Base commander en route to range 7. All personnel prepare for immediate inspection." The sergeant stiffened. The airmen went rigid, because a base commander never left his office without reason. And if he was coming here, someone had told him what just happened. The air was heavy with the realization. Recognition was coming, and whatever truth the old man held was about to be revealed in front of everyone. The hum of the intercom faded, leaving behind a throbbing quiet that felt heavier than the rifle the old man had just reassembled. Every soldier on the firing line snapped into tense half-attention, unsure whether to stand tall or to pretend nothing unusual had happened. The old man simply rested his hands on the mop handle, though he didn't lean on it. His posture was straight, steady, almost military in its stillness. Moments later, the distant crunch of boots approached, not hurried but deliberate, the kind of stride belonging to someone who was used to being obeyed long before he reached the room. The double doors swung open, and in stepped the base commander, a man whose mere presence shifted the gravity of the space. His uniform was immaculate, his expression carved from stone, but his eyes, sharp, scanning, unforgiving, missed nothing. Airmen shot to full attention, chins high, spines rigid. The sergeant saluted so fast and so hard his palm cracked like a whip. The commander didn't return the salute immediately. His gaze swept the room, passing the soldiers, passing the officers, landing at last on the old janitor standing quietly near the firing bench. The commander froze. The soldiers saw it, a momentary fracture in his expression, shock flickering across his face before he masked it again. He stepped forward, almost involuntarily. "You!" He breathed, the word escaping before protocol could catch it. The airmen exchanged panicked glances. The old man simply nodded, not respectfully, not dismissively, just an acknowledgement between two men who recognized something in each other. But the commander needed confirmation. His voice steadied as he addressed the sergeant. "Explain!" The sergeant swallowed. "Sir, the janitor was demonstrating something." One of the cocky airmen blurted out, "Sir, he shot all 8 plates blindfolded." "Perfect hits!" The commander turned sharply, eyes narrowing. Blindfolded, the old man didn't flinch, didn't brag, didn't even meet the commander's stare. A long silence dragged over them. Then the commander pointed at the rifle on the bench. "Who set that up for him?" "He did, sir," the sergeant said. "Disassembled it too, blindfolded, reassembled it faster than anyone I've ever seen." Another heavy silence. The commander stepped closer, boots echoing like distant artillery reports. He stood directly in front of the old man now, searching his face, looking past the wrinkles, past the white beard, searching for a ghost he hadn't expected to see again. And then it happened. The commander straightened to his fullest height, heels clicking together, spine rigid. His right hand snapped up in the crispest, sharpest salute anyone on that range had ever witnessed. The airmen nearly choked. The sergeant looked like his soul tried to leave his body. The commander held the salute, voice firm but trembling with something deeper. "Sir, it is an honor to have you on my range." The old man exhaled slowly, then returned the salute with a motion that didn't belong to a janitor. It belonged to someone who had lived his whole life in the tight discipline of military precision. The room seemed to tilt. Everything the young soldiers thought they knew crumbled in an instant. The commander lowered his hand and turned to his men, his voice rising from restrained awe to command authority that shook dust from the ceiling. "Do you know who this man is?" No one answered. They couldn't. The commander went on. "This man holds the highest recorded cold-shot precision streak in the history of our special operations community. This man trained the very shooters who trained me. This man ran covert marksmanship programs during missions none of you have clearance to even read the names of." He pointed to the blindfold. "And if he put that on, you should consider yourselves lucky he only aimed at steel." The airmen swallowed hard, regret cutting deeper than shame, because now they understood exactly who they had been mocking, and part of them feared the worst, that the old man's judgment of them was already set. The weight of the commander's words settled over the firing line like a thick fog, muffling every breath, every heartbeat, every whisper of regret coming from the young airmen who only minutes earlier had mocked the old janitor without hesitation. Now they stood frozen, each replaying their own arrogance in their minds, realizing how blind they had been to the quiet legend standing before them. The old man lowered his hand from the salute, his face unreadable, neither triumphant nor offended, simply steady, like someone who had seen too much in life to be shaken by the foolishness of youth. The commander stepped closer, his voice softening but still carrying authority. "Sir, if you are willing, I would like these men to learn something from you today." The old man looked past him at the 3 soldiers who had laughed the loudest. They couldn't meet his eyes. One stared at the floor, another forced himself to swallow the lump in his throat, and the third looked like he wanted to disappear into the concrete. Slowly, the old man nodded. He reached for the blindfold again, not dramatically, not for show, simply because he knew actions taught better than lectures. He tied it back over his eyes and lifted the rifle once more. The airmen winced, almost terrified of what he might do next, but the old man didn't aim downrange this time. Instead, he placed the rifle down gently and turned to face them, all of them blindfolded, yet somehow more perceptive than any soldier on that field. His voice when it came was calm, quiet, but sharpened by the kind of truth that cuts through pride. "A rifle doesn't care how strong you are," he said. "It doesn't care about your rank. It doesn't care how loud you laugh. A rifle only listens to respect. If you don't give it that," he tapped the bench, "it will betray you." The soldiers leaned in. No one blinked. "And men," he added softly, "men are the same." He removed the blindfold slowly, letting the silence do the teaching. Then the commander stepped forward, addressing his troops with a gravity none of them had heard in him before. "You judged this man by his uniform," he said. "You judged him by his mop. You judged him by his age. You didn't stop to consider the miles he walked so you could stand here today in peace." The words hit like punches. Each soldier stood straighter, not from pride but from remorse. Then something unexpected happened. The old man walked to the edge of the firing line and beckoned the three soldiers forward. They approached hesitantly, like children awaiting judgment. He handed each of them an empty rifle. "Field strip it," he said. They tried, fumbling immediately, and within seconds their embarrassment grew painful to watch. But the old man didn't mock. Instead, he guided their hands, correcting grip, repositioning thumbs, adjusting leverage. His voice was firm, patient, deeply human. "Skill comes from repetition. Respect comes from humility," he said. "You don't have one without the other." By the time they reassembled the rifles, slow, imperfect, but learning, the tension in the air had dissolved into something softer. Not forgiveness yet, but the path toward it. The first airman finally broke, his voice trembling. "Sir, we're sorry. We didn't know." The old man nodded. "I know you didn't, but now you do." The commander placed a hand on the old man's shoulder, a gesture of reverence rarely given to anyone. "If there is anything you ever need," he said quietly, "my base will provide it." The old man only smiled, picking up his mop again, as if returning to the simplest task in the world. But every soldier there now saw the mop differently. They saw the man differently. And for the rest of their careers, whenever arrogance crept in, they would remember the day a quiet janitor shot steel blindfolded, and taught them what a real marksman and a real man looked like.